So I can break some news to you today. They actually did find something. Actually, they found two things. But what those things are and where they found them right now is a secret.
Cameras caught exotic animals where they shouldn't be. Safe rooms were found behind children's closets. Hidden airstrips disguised as playgrounds. But that's just scratching the surface.
As you get closer, you can see some odd details. The walls are very thick or hollow in some places. There's signs of some kind of enormous explosion. So this place clearly has a story to tell.
Behind Pablo Escobar's empire were blueprints soaked in paranoia.
Don Pablo Escobar.
Where every tile, tunnel, and statue told a darker story. And just when authorities thought they'd seen it all, they found a sealed steel room with no air, no exit, and no explanation. A zoo that wouldn't die. They thought seizing the property would end the madness. But when the Colombian government took control of Pablo Escobar's infamous Hacienda Nápoles, they weren't just reclaiming land, they were inheriting a monster. Walking onto the estate, officials were met with elephants lumbering across open fields, giraffes poking their heads through broken enclosures, and, most notoriously, hippos. Most of the exotic animals were relocated to proper zoos. But the hippos? That's where things went off the rails. Authorities deemed them too aggressive and too complicated to move. So they left them, just 4, 3 females, 1 male. That's all it took. The animals wandered from the estate into the surrounding wetlands. They found the Magdalena River, and they started multiplying, fast. Today, they're no longer Escobar's hippos. They're Colombia's problem. Farmers report wrecked fences and flooded pastures. Fishermen complain of boats being shadowed and chased. And biologists? They're sounding the alarm. One adult hippo can unleash up to 20 pounds of waste daily. Waste that disrupts river ecosystems, spikes algae growth, and drains oxygen from the water. In other words, a biological wrecking ball. They've tried everything: tranquilizer darts, fencing, experimental contraceptives, even surgeries in the wild. But the hippos are winning. 70 were marked for international relocation, a plan expected to cost north of $3.5 million. And yet the population keeps growing. And when one of them, dubbed Pepe by locals, was shot, the outrage was national. From then on, no one wanted blood on their hands. Now, there's even a mascot named Vanessa inside the park. A killer legacy turned cartoon icon. But behind the zebra-striped safari gates, something far darker was hiding. Because Hacienda Nápoles wasn't just Escobar's jungle kingdom, it was also his private airbase. The runway that smuggled silence. Dig beneath the surface of Hacienda Nápoles and you'll find a fully functional airstrip. Aviation trackers still list it. Asphalt, 1.25 kilometers long, runway 06/24. Long enough to handle light twin-engine aircraft. The exact models traffickers favored for short, fast hops between jungle strips and coastal drop zones. This wasn't a hobbyist's runway. This was a delivery lane for illegal cargo. Investigators believe planes lifted off at dawn or dusk, flying low to dodge radar, landing in friendly zones across the Caribbean and Central America. American radar teams, even back then, frequently tracked Cessnas streaking north over the ocean from Colombia. No one could confirm every flight launched from Nápoles, but everything about the strip screamed purpose. And the eerie part? After Escobar's death, after the site was transformed into a family theme park, the runway stayed on the books. Aviation databases still flagged its coordinates. A ghost strip, its past etched into asphalt. Today, kids splash down water slides on the same concrete that once launched drug shipments. The smuggler's runway has become a selfie backdrop. But while planes came and went above ground, below the surface, that's where the real secrets were buried. The vaults that weren't supposed to be found. When demolition crews rolled into Escobar's old Miami Beach mansion in late January of 2016, they weren't expecting surprises. The place had been sitting for decades, seized, resold, forgotten. But then an excavator claw cracked through a concrete slab and the floor buckled. Inside that broken foundation was a vault, not a safe behind a painting. A 2-foot by 2-foot metal box embedded in the very skeleton of the home. Heavy, sealed. Workers stared. The owners, Christian de Bourdoir and Jennifer Vallopi, swept it away to a bank vault. Then they announced something straight out of a movie. They wouldn't open it until their documentary was finished. That was just the beginning. Because soon, there were whispers of a second safe. Some said it had been seen before demolition. Others claimed it vanished without a trace. News outlets covered it like a mystery. The owners hired round-the-clock security, and police looked into the disappearance. And then came the relics. An earlier sweep had turned up an empty safe and a suspicious cylinder. Another dead end. Or another chapter in a house designed to hide. One thing was now crystal clear. This wasn't just drug money stashed under floorboards. It was concealment baked into architecture, built during construction, poured into the bones. As for what's inside, nobody knows. Gold? Coded ledgers? Lucky pesos? Doesn't matter. The real revelation is what it tells us. Secrecy was structural, and it wasn't the only one built like a bunker. Walls that took the blast. Escobar's homes weren't just secretive. They were built to take punishment. Nowhere is that clearer than at La Manuela, his lakeside retreat near Guatapé. In 1993, a targeted explosion tore through the property, and while ceilings collapsed and furniture vanished into rubble, much of the outer structure refused to fall. The secret? Double-layered walls. Not for cash, for survival. Investigators and visitors later confirmed what the wreckage revealed. The walls were designed with a built-in void between two layers of masonry. That gap acted like a primitive shock absorber, something closer to military-grade architecture than luxury design. And in Escobar's final year, that design choice made sense. He wasn't just running from law enforcement, he was at war with vigilantes. The group known as Los Pepes used bombs, arson, and relentless firepower to erase his influence. Any property without protection was a target. So he hardened the walls. Tour guides still spin tales of mountains of money stuffed inside those cavities, but the evidence points the other way. No loose bricks of cash, no hidden vaults in this case. Just smart engineering. Sacrifice the outer shell to preserve the frame. After the blast, those doubled walls stood tall, while everything around them fell apart. Escobar wasn't just storing wealth, he was preparing for siege. And when that siege finally came, it didn't stop at buildings. Even his prized possessions were hunted. The night luxury turned to ashes. February of 1993. A warehouse in Medellin erupts into flames. But this wasn't a random fire, it was targeted. The vigilante group Los Pepes had broken in and doused the space with gasoline, torching Escobar's private showroom in a single brutal act of retaliation. By morning, 6 Rolls-Royces, 1 Porsche, a Mercedes, and around 20 motorcycles were reduced to twisted metal. Police documented every melted frame, every blackened hood. Years later, tourists visiting Hacienda Nápoles would walk past the rusting remains. The once pristine vehicles now sit like burnt offerings, steel carcasses laid out in rows, hubcaps warped, engines exposed. But, as with everything Escobar touched, the ruins didn't stay quiet. Legends attached themselves to the wrecks. One popular story claims he owned Al Capone's bulletproof Cadillac. Tour guides point to a charred black sedan as proof, but car experts say otherwise. That model doesn't match. Some believe Escobar drilled holes into a vintage Cadillac himself, faking a gangster aesthetic. Another myth clings to a skeletal Porsche 356, supposedly bombed long before the warehouse raid. Photos show it still parked at the estate, its curves melted, its legacy burned into cartel lore. And always there's the fantasy. Hidden compartments, cash sealed into car doors, fortunes baked into bodywork. But the truth hits harder. These weren't getaway cars. They were trophies. No safe room, no stash, just fire. And as the smoke cleared, one image still stood tall, the gate of Hacienda Nápoles, where Escobar had mounted his true symbol of power. Smuggling signals. Hidden in art. Not all of Escobar's messaging came through safes or runways. Some of it was buried in plain view, coded into the art that decorated his properties. Deep within several of his estates, investigators and visitors noticed a recurring theme: custom paintings, hand-picked murals, and elaborate wall art that did more than fill space. Some insiders believe they were signposts, visual cues to communicate logistics, hierarchy, or even location data within the organization. One example: a recurring oil painting of a white horse galloping alone in an open field. It hung in at least 2 of Escobar's homes. Harmless at first glance, until former cartel affiliates alleged it was a reference to La Bestia, a coded name for a smuggling route running through the Orinoco. Another framed canvas depicted a row of ships moving through fog. According to whispers, it corresponded to a specific maritime path used for nighttime shipments toward Panama. Multiple safe houses were also said to include abstract murals, where certain color placements, blues, reds, and yellows, aligned with room layouts and storage locations. Think of it as a visual cipher. If you knew the code, you knew where the product was. Art historians who later reviewed some of these pieces described them as unusually detailed for narco-era decor. Some even bore signatures, untraceable aliases suspected to be cartel code names. And just like the estate's zebra-striped plane or dinosaur statues, these paintings walked the line between myth and message. Were they coded maps, signals to insiders, or simply expensive smoke and mirrors? The living rooms built to vanish money. In one of Escobar's former family safe houses, Roberto Escobar once demonstrated a trick that said everything without saying much. He knelt beside an ordinary desk in the living room, lifted a wooden plank beneath it, and revealed a hidden compartment large enough, according to him, to stash $2 million. Then he dropped the board back into place like it was nothing. This was no one-off gimmick. Across multiple properties, Escobar's homes had been engineered with concealment baked into the everyday. Hiding places weren't restricted to steel vaults or reinforced bunkers. They were built into floorboards, coffee tables, bathroom tiles, and behind wall hangings. The concealment strategy was so deeply embedded, it became part of the interior architecture. According to Roberto, The cartel spent over $2,500 every month just on rubber bands. Not for documents, but for stacking currency. He also claimed they routinely wrote off 10% of the stored cash due to humidity, rats, or general loss. That level of attrition only made sense in a world where cash was hidden everywhere, sometimes hastily, sometimes permanently. After Escobar's death, the fallout took a bizarre turn. Properties were raided not just by authorities but by treasure hunters, all hoping to uncover buried millions left behind in walls or beneath tiles. Some sites were found gutted, walls punched through, furniture smashed open. Even years later, certain tour guides continued pointing out subtle structural quirks. A loose brick here, a hollow panel there. Not proof of wealth, but echoes of a system that demanded hiding in plain sight. The architecture told its own story. Every room was a vault. Every innocuous object was a potential container. Escobar's empire wasn't just protected by weapons, it was preserved through design. And that design didn't stop at Colombia. On the shores of Miami Beach, a mansion would soon reveal the exact same blueprint. Coded diaries and ledger fragments still missing. For all the safes cracked and stashes uncovered, there's one category of Pablo Escobar's empire that remains largely unaccounted for: his ledgers. Not the drug tallies everyone assumes were stored in vaults, but the handwritten notebooks and coded diaries that insiders claim recorded everything from bribes to betrayals. Multiple former associates, including cartel accountant Roberto Escobar, have alluded to a parallel paper trail. Tiny spiral pads, torn sheets, and pocket-sized books, filled with numbers, initials, and strange marks. Some of these fragments were allegedly disguised as school notebooks or prayer journals, stashed in nondescript drawers or inside clothing. In two separate raids, one in Medellin, another near Envigado, authorities did seize incomplete financial logs. But the juiciest rumors focus on what wasn't found. According to whispers, Escobar kept a master ledger encrypted with a cipher only he and two others knew. And it wasn't just about cash. It supposedly included coded references to safe houses, overseas holdings, and payments to unnamed officials. The most chilling clue? A blank book found during a raid in 1992. It had only one line written inside: "If this is opened, war begins." That book disappeared into evidence custody. It hasn't been seen since. Years later, treasure hunters and rogue journalists continue chasing whispers of lost pages. Some claim there are diary entries buried with confidants. Others believe certain coded sheets were smuggled out of Colombia and sold to collectors who have no idea what they're sitting on. If even a piece of those documents ever surfaces, uncensored, uncoded, it could ignite more than headlines. It could reopen old wounds, name names, and shake the myth of Escobar to its core. The zoo plane, with a flight log that vanished. One aircraft in particular has kept investigators scratching their heads for decades. A short-range utility plane used for transporting animals into Hacienda Nápoles, not for cocaine, for cargo that growled, hissed, and clawed. Locals called it La Bestia Aérea, the airborne beast. Unlike the zebra-striped gate plane, this one was made real trips. Witnesses claim they saw it landing late at night, unloading crates with everything from exotic birds to juvenile big cats. Flight paths were never officially filed. Its registration number was allegedly changed multiple times, and the crew often rotated. No names, just faces that came and went. The last confirmed sighting was in late 1989. Then it disappeared. Here's where it gets strange. When authorities began cataloging the remaining aircraft on Escobar's properties, they expected to find its maintenance logs, or at least one flight book. Instead, the logbook for La Bestia Aérea was gone. Not misplaced, erased. But whispers persisted. Some say the final flights weren't carrying animals at all, but people. Cartel insiders, negotiators, possibly even political figures looking for safe, off-radar passage. One unconfirmed account claims the last trip was to a jungle airstrip near the Venezuelan border, and that it never returned. A retired Air Force mechanic who inspected surviving aircraft years later said the hangar space designated for the animal plane was unusually reinforced. Thicker walls, modified floor anchors, a single line of rusted chains, still bolted to the tarmac, facing the jungle. So did Escobar really use the zoo as cover for covert movement? Or was the plane itself a decoy, its real purpose hidden behind a roar and a cage? Whatever it was, the missing logbook leaves one more blank page in the narco story no one has been able to write. Power bills that kept coming years after his death. By the mid-2000s, most of Escobar's major properties had either been seized, demolished, or converted into tourist sites. His empire was officially dismantled, or so it seemed. But in 2007, something strange caught the attention of Colombian tax auditors. Utility records tied to a rural property believed to be abandoned. Specifically, electricity bills, small, consistent, and oddly regular. Month after month, energy usage continued, enough to power lights, ventilation, and basic appliances. Not enough for farming, not enough for residential living, just enough to suggest presence. Investigators eventually traced the bills to a low-profile estate in the Antioquia region, one that had never been listed among Escobar's official holdings. It was registered under a shell company dissolved in the early 90s. But when agents arrived, they didn't find squatters or traffickers. They found an empty house. But empty didn't tell the full story. The walls were freshly painted. The kitchen had unexpired canned goods. Even stranger, the refrigerator hummed. And the security lights? Fully operational. Whoever had been there had just left, possibly days earlier. In the back, a small generator sat covered beneath a plastic tarp. Connected, fueled, ready. Officials swept the place for evidence of recent cartel activity, but found none. No drugs, no weapons, no fingerprints. Just quiet signs of maintenance. A bedroom with a made bed. A water heater set to medium. A shortwave radio unplugged, but functional. So who was paying the bills, and why? The records pointed to an offshore holding account that had been inactive for over a decade, until it started auto-paying that one bill every 30 days. No names, no login attempts, just a cold drip of electricity for a property that, officially, never mattered. To this day, no one has claimed ownership. But the power meter doesn't lie. And in a world where secrets were buried in walls, tunnels, and safes, maybe Escobar left behind something else. An address that still whispers. Drop your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe, because what we're diving into next might just connect everything you thought you knew about the world's most infamous drug empire.